The sun did not rise over the New Mexico territory so much as it invaded. It spilled over the jagged teeth of the eastern mountains, a harsh, coppery flood that turned the dust of the street into a haze of gold and choking grit. Lila Merritt stood on the porch of the telegraph office, a broom in her hands, watching the day begin with the weary skepticism of a woman who had seen 28 years of life and felt every single one of them. The town of Ocotillo Flats was waking up. Though it never truly slept, it just shifted from the boisterous violence of the saloon at night to the groaning labor of the rail yard at dawn. She swept the boardwalk, the bristles scratching against the warped pine planks. It was a rhythmic sound, a small attempt to impose order on a world that consisted mostly of dirt, wind, and bad intentions. Lila was not a beautiful woman in the way the porcelain dolls in the fashion plates from St. Louis were beautiful. Her skin was toasted the color of almond shells by the relentless sun. Her hands were rough, calloused from rains and buckets and the endless scrubbing of floors, but she had eyes the color of polished flint, sharp and unyielding. Set in a face that had learned the most valuable lesson the frontier had to offer: keep your mouth shut, and you might just live to see tomorrow. Behind her, the telegraph key began to chatter. It was a mechanical, insect-like sound that had become the heartbeat of her existence. "Lila," called a voice from inside. "Lila, you hear that the line is buzzing all the way from Santa Fe?" Lila leaned the broom against the peeling white paint of the wall and stepped inside. The office smelled of stale tobacco, ink, and the dry heat that permeated everything. Ben, the telegraph operator, was hunched over his desk. He was a boy of barely 20, with hair the color of straw and a face that still held the softness of the East Coast. He had come out here looking for adventure and had found only boredom and heat rash. "What is the news, Ben?" Lila asked, moving to the sorting table where the mail bags lay in disorganized heaps. Ben stopped typing and looked up, his eyes wide behind his spectacles. "Trouble near the reservation line. They say a raiding party hit a supply wagon near Fort Wingate. 3 dead. Lila paused, a bundle of letters in her hand. "Who says?" "The Wire says," Ben replied, gesturing to the machine as if it were a prophet of God. "The Wire says what men tell it to say," Lila murmured. She went back to sorting. "And men lie, Ben, especially when the railroad wants more land." Ben lowered his voice, glancing toward the open door as if the walls had ears. "You should not talk like that, not with Agent Crowley in town." Lila felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach at the name, but her face remained a mask of indifference. "I do not talk like that outside this room. That is the rule." "Silence to survive." Ben quoted her own motto back to her, a sad smile touching his lips. "Exactly," she said. "Silence pays the rent. Silence keeps the peace." She finished sorting the local post and picked up a heavy canvas sack destined for the outpost at Painted Rock. It was a 2-day ride, hard riding through a country that was mostly scorpion grass and broken slate, but the pay for the run was $20. $20 added to the $340 she had hidden beneath the floorboards of her room at Mrs. Harlow's boarding house. She needed $500 to buy a train ticket to San Francisco and start a life where the air did not taste like ash, and the men did not look at her like she was a piece of livestock to be bartered. The bells above the door jingled, not with a merry sound, but with a sharp, intrusive clang. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lila did not need to turn around to know who it was. The smell of expensive bay rum cologne and stale cigar smoke announced him before he even spoke. "Good morning, Miss Merritt. Benjamin." Agent Crowley was a man who looked too clean for the territory. His suit was a dark charcoal, free of dust, and his white shirt was starched stiff. He was the government agent assigned to the district, a man who managed the flow of supplies to the reservations and the flow of land deeds to the railroad companies. He had a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that looked like wet stones. "Agent Crowley," Lila said, turning slowly. She kept her hands clasped in front of her apron. "Can we help you?" Crowley took off his hat, holding it over his chest in a gesture of mock humility. "I have a favor to ask, a matter of some urgency." He placed a package on the counter, It was not a letter. It was a thick, rectangular object wrapped in oilskin and tied with heavy twine. It looked like a book, a ledger. "I need this delivered to the relay station at Painted Rock," Crowley said. "The regular courier encountered some difficulties. He is indisposed." Lila looked at the package. It sat there, innocuous and heavy. She did not know why, but the hair on the back of her arms stood up. It looked like just a book, but it felt like a weapon. "I am already taking the mailbag to Painted Rock this morning," Lila said, her voice steady. "I can take it." "I knew I could count on you. Miss Merritt," Crowley said, sliding a silver coin across the counter. It was $1. "A tip. You are a woman of rare capability and discretion." He lingered on the word discretion. "I just delivered the mail. Agent Crowley," she said. "This is not mail," he corrected softly. "These are administrative records, payroll adjustments, supply inventories. Very dull stuff, I assure you, but vital for the inspectors coming down from the Capitol. It must get to the relay station by tomorrow evening. Can you do that?" "I can," she said. "Good." Crowley tapped the oilskin package with a manicured fingernail. "Do not lose it, and do not let it get wet. We would not want the ink to run and confuse the inspectors. Would we?" He smiled again, a tightening of the facial muscles that conveyed zero warmth, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Oh, and keep your eyes open. Miss Merritt, they say the Navajo are restless. A man like me worries about a woman traveling alone." "I can handle a horse," Lila said. "And a Winchester." "I'm sure you can," Crowley said. And then he was gone, leaving the smell of bay rum hanging in the dusty air. Lila stared at the package. She reached out and touched it. It was heavy, dense with paper and secrets. "I do not like him," Ben whispered. "He looks like an undertaker measuring you for a pine box." "He pays," Lila said curtly, shoving the ledger into the bottom of her leather saddlebag, beneath her spare shirt and a tin of beans. And that is all that matters. An hour later, Lila sat at the small table in Mrs. Harlow's kitchen, nursing a mug of coffee that was black as tar and nearly as thick. Mrs. Harlow, a woman built like a whiskey barrel with a heart made of marshmallow, was frying eggs in a skillet that hissed and popped. "You are leaving again, Mrs.?" Harlow asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "The dust has not even settled from your last run." "Money does not wait for the dust to settle, Mrs. Harlow," Lila said. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. It scalded her tongue, a sensation she welcomed. It woke her up. "You work too hard, child," the older woman scolded gently. "A pretty girl like you. You should be looking for a husband, not chasing after mail coaches." Lila gave a short, dry laugh. "A husband. Out here the men are either drunkards, gamblers, or looking for a nursemaid with a womb. I will take the horses. Thank you. Not all of them, Mrs. Harlow said, sliding a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of Lila. "There are good men, quiet men." "Quiet men are just loud men waiting for a reason to shout," Lila said. She ate quickly, efficiently. Food was fuel. Nothing more. "Where are you headed this time?" "Painted Rock," Lila said. "Just a standard run. Drop the bag. Pick up the return post. Come back. 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turns." "Mrs." Harlow looked out the window. The sky was a piercing, unnatural blue. It was a vast, empty bowl of azure, without a single cloud to break the monotony. "The sky is too pretty." "Mrs." Harlow murmured. "My grandmother used to say that the sky is blue. It is hiding a storm." Lila glanced out. "It is just summer, Mrs. Harlow, hot and dry." "Maybe," the old woman said, "but the air feels tight, like a drum skin." Lila finished her meal and stood up. She reached into her pocket and pulled out $2. She placed them on the table. "For the room until I get back." "Keep your money, girl," Mrs. Harlow said. "Pay me when you have your 500. Lila shook her head. "I pay my way. Always." She walked out to the stable behind the boarding house. Her horse, a roan mare named Bess, whinnied softly. Bess was not a fast horse, but she had lungs like bellows and legs that could climb a vertical wall if you asked her nicely. Lila saddled her with practiced ease, checking the cinch, checking the hooves. She slid her Winchester rifle into the scabbard on the saddle and checked the Colt Navy revolver at her hip. She mounted up, feeling the familiar shift of the world as she rose above the dust. She guided Bess out of the alley and onto the main street. The town was fully awake now. A wagon loaded with lumber was creaking toward the new hotel construction site. Men were shouting. A dog barked. Lila pulled the brim of her hat down low. She did not want to make eye contact. She wanted to be a ghost. She touched her heels to Bess's flanks, and the horse broke into a trot, heading west toward the open jaw of the canyon lands. The ride was grueling. By noon, the sun was a hammer pounding against the anvil of the earth. The heat shimmered off the rocks in waves, making the distant mesas look like they were melting. Lila rode in a trance, her body moving in rhythm with the horse. She thought about the ledger in her saddlebag. It bumped against her leg with every step, a constant, nagging weight. Why had Crowley been so specific about the inspectors? Why not just send it with the regular military convoy that passed through on Fridays? Stop it, she told herself. Curiosity killed the cat, but asking questions in this territory killed the woman. She focused on the landscape. The terrain here was beautiful in a cruel way. Red rock spires jutted up from the ground like the fingers of buried giants. Sagebrush clung to life in the crevices, filling the air with a pungent, spicy scent. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she reached the rim of the Copper Canyon. Below, the river was a ribbon of green and silver, cutting through the stone. It was the only water for 20 miles. She pulled Bess to a halt to let the horse breathe. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the vast, ringing silence of the desert. Then, she saw him. He was far away, perhaps a quarter of a mile, standing on a ridge of limestone that overlooked the trail she would have to take. At first, she thought he was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a twisted juniper tree. But then the shadow moved. He was on horseback, sitting tall and easy in the saddle. He was an Indian, Navajo. By the look of the blanket across his horse and the red band tied around his forehead, the distance was too great to make out his features. But she could feel his gaze. It was not the predatory leering of the men in town. It was the detached, focused scrutiny of a hawk circling a field. He held a rifle, resting it casually across his thighs. He did not raise it. He did not shout. He simply watched her. Lila's hand drifted to her own rifle, her thumb brushing the hammer. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. "Just a scout," she whispered to Bess, patting the horse's neck. "Just watching." The rumors of raiding parties flashed through her mind. The 3 dead men at Fort Wingate. Was he one of them? Was he the vanguard for a dozen more warriors hidden in the rocks? She waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The figure on the ridge turned his horse slowly, with a fluidity that made horse and rider look like a single organism. He turned away from her and disappeared behind the rock face. He did not look back. Lila let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. She was shaking, not from fear, exactly, but from a strange, electric tension. It was the feeling of standing on a train track and feeling the vibration of the engine miles before you saw the smoke. "Let us go, Bess," she said, her voice sounding thin in the vastness. "Let us get this over with." She urged the horse forward, down the switchback trail into the canyon. The air grew cooler as they descended into the shadow of the cliffs, but the feeling of being watched never left her skin. By late afternoon, the too beautiful sky began to change. It happened slowly at first. The horizon to the north turned a bruised purple. The wind picked up, no longer a steady breeze but a series of erratic gusts that whipped the mane of her horse and threw sand into Lila's eyes. Misses. Harlow was right. The blue sky had been a lie. Lila pushed Bess harder. She needed to reach the way station by nightfall, or at least find a sheltered overhang. The canyon walls were steep here, and the river was running higher than usual, fed by snowmelt from the distant peaks. She touched the saddlebag again, The ledger. It felt heavier now, as if it were absorbing the gravity of the approaching storm. She remembered the look in Agent Crowley's eyes. Discretion. Why did she feel like she was carrying a bomb? She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. Her goal was simple. Deliver the bag. Get the receipt. Collect the $20. Add it to the stash. Leave. Leave the dust. Leave the heat. Leave the silence. She did not know that the man on the ridge was still there, moving parallel to her, hidden by the labyrinth of stone. She did not know that the 3 dead men at Fort Wingate had not been killed by Navajo arrows, but by Winchester bullets fired by men wearing boots, not moccasins. She did not know that the ledger in her bag contained the names of men who had sold their souls for silver, and that she was riding not toward a paycheck, but toward a cliff edge. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound that echoed off the canyon walls like a choir of ghosts. A tumbleweed, large and spiny, rolled across the path, startling Bess. Lila steadied the mare with a firm hand and a soft word. Easy, girl, easy. We are just passing through. But as the first heavy drop of rain splattered against her cheek, warm and smelling of copper, Lila Merritt had the distinct, chilling realization that she was wrong. She was not just passing through. She was walking into the trap, and the only thing waiting for her in the dark was a storm she could not outrun. The wind that had been nagging at Lila for the last hour suddenly sharpened its teeth. It ceased to be a mere movement of air and became a physical assault, stripping the heat from the rocks and replacing it with a cold, static charge that made the fine hairs on her arms stand erect. Bess, the roan mare, tossed her head and danced sideways, her hooves clicking nervously against the slate. Lila tightened her grip on the reins, her eyes scanning the narrow throat of the canyon ahead. The walls rose vertically here, 200 feet of red sandstone that seemed to lean inward, pressing down on the trail. Then came the sound. It was not the rumble of thunder, though the clouds above were swollen and black like bruised fruit. It was the sharp, distinctive crack of a Winchester rifle, followed immediately by the chaotic shouting of men. Lila spurred Bess forward, driven by an instinct she could not quite name, part curiosity, part dread, and a foolish hope that perhaps someone needed help. She rounded a bend where the canyon widened slightly into a dry wash, and the scene unfolded before her like a nightmare painted in dust and blood. A wagon lay overturned, its wheels spinning lazily in the air. It was not a military transport. It was a simple freight wagon, the kind used to haul mail and light supplies between the mining camps. 2 horses lay dead in the traces. Circling the wreckage were 4 riders. They wore buckskins and their faces were streaked with paint, harsh lines of black and vermilion. They whooped and shrieked, driving their ponies in tight circles, firing into the overturned wood. To any observer watching from the high rim, it was a raiding party, a clear case of savagery. But Lila was not on the rim. She was 50 yards away, and she saw what the distance would have hidden. She saw that the raiders were riding heavy cavalry saddles, not the simple blankets or pads of the Navajo. She saw that one of them, despite the feathers in his hair, wore boots with distinct silver roweled spurs, the kind sold in the high-end tack shops of Santa Fe. And she saw the way they held their rifles not loose and fluid, but tucked tight into the shoulder. The disciplined posture of men trained on a parade ground. One of the attackers spotted her. He shouted, pointing a gloved hand in her direction. Lila did not wait. She wheeled Bess around, but before she could dig her heels in, a man crawled out from the debris of the wagon. It was the driver. His shirt was soaked in crimson, but he dragged himself across the dirt with desperate strength, waving something at her. "Help!" he croaked, the sound barely carrying over the wind. Lila made a split-second choice that she knew, even as she made it, might cost her everything. Instead of fleeing back the way she came, she kicked Bess forward, galloping straight toward the wreckage, cutting inside the circle of the riders. Bullets kicked up geysers of dirt around her. She leaned low over Bess's neck, making herself small. She slid the mare to a halt beside the dying man, swinging out of the saddle while the horse was still moving. The man was older, his face gray with the pallor of impending death. He did not ask for water. He did not ask for a priest. He reached out with a hand that trembled violently and shoved a flat, oilskin-wrapped packet into Lila's chest. It was similar to the ledger she already carried, but smaller, denser. "Take it," he wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. "Do not give it to the agent. Do not give it to Crowley." "Who?" Lila shouted over the roar of the wind and the approaching hoofbeats. "Who do I give it to?" The man's eyes were already losing focus, drifting toward the angry sky. "The inspector, from Santa Fe. He is coming on the train, finding the truth." A bullet struck the wood of the wagon inches from Lila's head, sending splinters flying into her cheek. The man gasped once, a terrible, wet sound, and then his head fell back against the broken wheel. He was gone. Lila scrambled back into the saddle, shoving the packet deep into her jacket, right against her heart. The 4 riders were closing in, realizing that their witness was now also their courier. "Get her!" One of them screamed. The voice was not speaking Navajo or Spanish. It was English, harsh and guttural. "Do not let her reach the river." Lila turned best toward the only escape route, left a narrow deer trail that zigzagged down the steep embankment toward the canyon floor, where the river churned. It was a suicide path, steep and slick, with the first drops of rain that were now beginning to fall like lead shot. "Go! Best go!" Lila screamed. The mare plunged down the slope. Stones clattered loose, tumbling into the void. The pursuers hesitated at the rim, their heavier horses balking at the treacherous descent. That hesitation bought Lila 10 seconds, but 10 seconds was not enough. The storm broke in earnest. The sky cracked open, unleashing a deluge that turned the dust instantly into grease. Bess's hooves scrambled for purchase on a slab of wet limestone. The mare shrieked, her hind legs sliding out from under her. Lila kicked her feet free of the stirrups, throwing herself clear just as the horse went down. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of gray rock and gray sky. She rolled, tumbling uncontrollably down the incline. Sharp shale tore at her clothes. Mesquite branches whipped her face. She could not stop. Gravity had claimed her. She slid over the edge of a small drop-off and plummeted 10 feet, hitting the water with a bone-jarring splash. The river was freezing. It was snowmelt from the high peaks, shocking the air from her lungs. The current grabbed her, twisting her around, dragging her over smooth stones. Lila fought, kicking wildly, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs like sodden chains. She gasped for air, swallowing water, and was swept around a bend in the canyon wall, away from the trail, into a secluded alcove where the water deepened and slowed against a sheer cliff face. She flailed, reaching for anything solid. Her hand struck a smooth, wet rock. She clawed at it, hauling herself up, coughing and retching, her hair plastered across her face in a blinding curtain. She scrambled onto a flat shelf of limestone, hidden from the world above by an overhang of rock and a thicket of willow. She collapsed on her hands and knees, shivering violently, waiting for the bullet to strike her back. "Careful," a voice said. "The moss is slippery." Lila froze. The voice was deep, resonant, and impossibly calm. She wiped the hair from her eyes and looked up. She had not tripped onto an empty rock. She had stumbled directly into the private sanctuary of a man. Kayazi stood waist-deep in the pool of water just a few feet from where she lay. He was stark naked, though the dark water concealed him from the hips down. He was washing himself, a task he seemed in no hurry to abandon despite the woman who had just crashed into his bath like a falling star. Water beaded on his copper skin, tracing the lean, hard muscles of his shoulders and chest. His wet black hair was slicked back, revealing a face of striking angles, high cheekbones that could cut glass, and a jawline that suggested stubbornness as a default setting. He was not reaching for a weapon. He was not covering himself in shame. He was simply watching her. A bar of soap made from yucca root resting in one hand. His dark eyes were alert, intelligent, and lit with a faint, dry amusement that infuriated her even as it confused her. Lila scrambled backward, her back hitting the cold stone wall. I fell, she stammered, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. There are men. They are shooting. Kai did not look up at the rim of the canyon. He kept his eyes on her. He moved slowly through the water, approaching the rock shelf where she huddled. He moved with the predatory grace of a mountain lion, silent and sure-footed. He reached out a hand. It was a large hand, the fingers long and scarred from work. "Take my hand," he said quietly. "You are shaking so hard you might fall back in." Lila hesitated, then gripped his hand. His skin was warm despite the cold river. He pulled her further up onto the dry section of the ledge with effortless strength. He stayed in the water, leaning his arms on the rock shelf, looking up at her. The rain fell in sheets beyond the overhang, creating a curtain of noise that sealed them in this small, intimate space. "You have a habit of making an entrance," Kai said softly. The corner of his mouth quivered upward in the ghost of a smile. "Most people knock. You just fell from the sky." "I'm sorry," Lila gasped, clutching her jacket tight where the packet and the ledger were hidden. "I did not mean to intrude. I tripped." Kai tilted his head, studying her face, the scratch on her cheek, the terror in her eyes. The amusement in his expression softened into something deeper, something ancient and recognizable. "You tripped into my river," he murmured, "and you brought the thunder with you." He looked at the storm raging beyond their shelter, then back at her wild, frightened eyes. "You are the only storm I would ever welcome." "Bila Gana," he said. The sentence hung in the air between them, heavy with a meaning Lila could not parse in her panic. It was a line that sounded like poetry, but felt like a confession. But before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats thundered directly overhead on the canyon rim. The playful light vanished from Kai's eyes instantly. He did not move abruptly, but his stillness changed quality. It went from relaxed to rigid. He became a statue of alert tension. He raised a finger to his lips. Silence. Kai moved silently out of the water, grabbing a buckskin breechcloth from a pile of clothes on a nearby rock. He secured it quickly, his movements efficient, ignoring his nudity as a matter of practicality. He grabbed Lila's arm not gently this time, but firmly, and pulled her deeper into the shadows, behind a dense screen of reeds and fallen boulders. "Down," he whispered. "Breathe through your nose. Quiet." Lila crouched beside him, the wet fabric of her dress clinging to her skin. She could smell him now, the scent of river water, sage smoke, and warm skin. It was a grounding scent in the midst of chaos. Above them, the horses had stopped. The wind carried the voices of the men down into the canyon. "She went over the edge," one man shouted. "I saw the horse go down." "Check the river," another voice commanded. It was the same harsh voice from before. "If she is dead, fine, but I need the bag. I need the leather packet. Voss will skin us alive if we lose it." Lila stiffened. Beside her, she felt Kai's muscles tense. "I see the horse," a third voice yelled. "Down there, caught on the rocks. It is dead." "Go down there," the leader barked. "Check the saddlebags. If the papers are not there, find the girl. She cannot have gone far." Lila peered through the reeds. She could see the silhouette of the men against the gray sky. She saw the glint of a silver spur. "They are not Indians," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. "Look at their boots. Look at how they walk." Kai was watching them too. His eyes narrowed to slits. "No," he whispered back. "They are not Dine, and they are not bandits." He looked down at Lila. He looked at the way she clutched her chest, protecting whatever was hidden inside her jacket. He saw the bruising on her arms, the blood on her cheek. "They are hunting you," Kai stated. It was not a question. "Specifically you." "They want what I am carrying," Lila admitted. "If they find me, they will kill me." Kai looked back up at the rim. He could hear the men starting to pick their way down the slope on foot. He was unarmed, save for a knife in his pile of clothes 10 feet away. His rifle was with his horse, hidden further up the canyon. He looked at Lila, He did not know her name. He knew only that she was a white woman who worked for the telegraph, part of the machine that was slowly eating his world. By all logic, he should let the white men fight amongst themselves. He should slip away into the water and disappear. It was safer. It was smarter. But then he looked at her hands. They were trembling, but they were curled into fists. She was terrified, but she was not broken. He hated the way the strong preyed on the weak. He had seen it when the soldiers came for his family. He had seen it when the agents cheated the elders. It was a rot in the soul of the world. To leave her here would be to feed that rot. Kai made his choice. It was not a choice made for glory, nor for the sudden, fierce attraction he felt for this stormbringer. It was a choice made of iron and old laws. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice hard as flint. "Do not move until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" Lila grabbed his wrist. Kai looked at her hand on his arm, then met her gaze. "I am going to make sure they do not find what they are looking for." He pulled away, moving like a shadow against the rock. He retrieved his knife, the blade dull and dark, and slipped into the gray curtain of the rain, leaving Lila alone in the reeds with the beating of her own heart and the echo of his words. "You are the only storm I'd ever welcome." Above them, the boots crunched on the gravel. Coming closer, the hunt was on, and for the first time in her life, Lila Merritt was not just a witness to the violence of the frontier. She was the prize. Lila pressed herself into the mud, the cold seeping into her bones. She touched the leather packet beneath her jacket. It felt hot, like a branding iron. She realized then that the ledger and the packet were not just paper. They were the keys to a kingdom of theft and lies. And she had just walked through the front door. She closed her eyes and prayed not to God, but to the silent, naked warrior who had pulled her from the water. "Please," she thought, "be the storm they are afraid of." The rain had reduced the world to a blur of gray mud and darker shadows. By the time Kai led Lila into the sanctuary of the hidden encampment, her teeth were chattering with a violence that rattled her entire rib cage. She was no longer Lila Merritt, the composed telegraph operator. She was a bundle of wet fabric and freezing flesh, barely holding onto consciousness. The camp was not a village, but a temporary scar on the landscape, tucked into a fold of the canyon where the overhang of the mesa provided natural shelter. There were 3 brush shelters, a small corral made of twisted juniper, and a fire that hissed defiantly against the damp air. Kai did not announce their arrival. He simply walked into the circle of firelight, supporting Lila's weight with an arm that felt like an iron band around her waist. A woman emerged from the largest shelter. This was Mara. She was old, her face a topographical map of deep lines and sunspots, but her movement was sharp. She looked at Kai, then at the shivering white woman. Her expression did not soften with pity. It tightened with calculation. "You brought a stray," Mara said. Her voice was like grinding stones. "And a storm. She needs heat." "Mara," Kai said. He did not apologize. He lowered Lila onto a pile of sheepskins near the fire. "And dry clothes." A man stepped out from the shadows of the corral. He was broad-shouldered, with skin the color of hammered bronze and eyes that betrayed a mixed heritage, one blue, one brown. This was Tomas, the blacksmith. He held a hammer loosely in his hand, his gaze flicking to the dark trail behind them. "Are they following?" Tomas asked. "Not yet," Kai replied. "The rain washed our tracks, but they will circle back." A younger woman, Nora, appeared behind Mara. She carried a toddler on her hip, her eyes wide and fearful. She looked at Lila with open curiosity, seeing not a threat, but a curiosity. "Help her," Kai ordered, his voice low but leaving no room for argument. Mara sighed, a sound of long-suffering pragmatism. She crouched beside Lila and began stripping away the sodden layers of the riding dress. There was no ceremony to it, no mystical chanting, just the rough, efficient hands of a woman who had nursed calves and children through the worst winters the territory could offer. "You are freezing, girl," Mara muttered. She shouted over her shoulder, "Nora, bring the water skin." And the sage tea. Lila tried to help, but her fingers were numb. Useless claws. She felt the wet fabric peel away, replaced by the scratchy, dry warmth of a wool blanket. Someone pressed a tin cup to her lips. The liquid was bitter and hot, tasting of earth and pine resin. She choked it down, feeling the heat bloom in her stomach. For the next hour, Lila drifted in a haze of feverish exhaustion. She was aware of the camp's sounds, the low murmur of Kai talking to Thomas, the crackle of the fire, the soft cooing of Nora's child. It was a domesticity she had not expected. The stories in town spoke of savages, of blood drinkers. But here, there was only the smell of wet dog, roasting rabbit, and the quiet tension of survival. When clarity finally returned, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence so profound it rang in her ears. Lila pushed herself up on one elbow. She was inside one of the brush shelters, covered in heavy furs. Her own clothes, were drying by the fire outside. She reached for her jacket, which lay in a heap nearby. Panic flared in her chest until her fingers brushed the hard, rectangular shape of the oilskin packet. It was still there. She pulled it out. The leather was damp, but the seal held. Lila looked around. She was alone in the shelter. Outside, the camp was asleep, save for a single figure keeping watch by the embers. With trembling hands, she broke the seal of the packet. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook, much thinner than the ledger she had in her saddlebag, but far more dangerous. She opened it to a random page. The handwriting was cramped. Hurried. September 12th. 500 head of cattle diverted from agency delivery. Sold to HV at the rail yard. Agent C took 40%. October 3rd. Blankets for winter issue marked as damaged and burned. Stock actually moved to Voss warehouse. Payment received $2,000 in gold dust. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. This was not just theft. This was murder by spreadsheet. Every blanket sold was a child freezing in the winter. Every sack of flour diverted was a family starving. And the name, Agent C, Crowley. She turned the page. January 18th. Survey maps altered. Water rights for Sector 4 erased from agency records. Land declared barren. Auction set for June. Bidder HV. Lila closed the book. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had spent 5 years in this territory keeping her head down, typing out telegrams, ignoring the whispers. She had told herself that if she just worked hard and stayed silent, she could buy her freedom. But silence was not a shield. Silence was an accomplice. Heavy reading for the dark, a voice said. Lila jumped, clutching the book to her chest. Kai stood at the entrance of the shelter. He had abandoned the breechcloth for a pair of worn canvas trousers and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. But he still moved with that unnerving, silent grace. He stepped inside and sat cross-legged across from her, seemingly unbothered by the lack of space. The firelight outside cast his face in sharp relief, shadowing his eyes. "You know what this is," Lila whispered. "I know it smells like blood," Kai said. He picked up a stick and traced a pattern in the dirt floor. "Paper always does." "It proves everything," Lila said, her voice gaining strength. "Crowley, the railroad man, Voss, they are stealing the supplies meant for the reservation. They are faking the raids to cover their tracks and drive the price of land down so they can buy it for pennies." Kai looked up. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set hard. "We know they steal. We do not need a book to tell us that. We see the empty wagons. We bury the children who die of the cough because there are no blankets. But this," Lila tapped the book, "this is proof, legal proof. If a federal inspector sees this—" "If," Kai cut her off. "And if he sees it, what then? A judge in Santa Fe writes a letter. A soldier is reassigned. The law's a knife. Bilagana. It only cuts for the hand that holds it. And right now, Crowley holds the handle." "Not if I take the handle away," Lila said. The ferocity in her own voice surprised her. Kai studied her. He looked at the set of her chin, the fire in her flint-gray eyes. He had pulled a drowning woman from the river, but the woman sitting before him now was made of steel. Why? He asked softly. You could burn that book. You could walk to the next town, get on a train, and live to be an old woman with soft hands. Why fight for people who are not yours? Lila looked down at the book. She thought of the dying courier. She thought of Ben, terrified in the telegraph office. She thought of the lies she had swallowed to survive. Because I am tired, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. I am tired of being afraid, and I am tired of them thinking they can own everything just because they can kill for it. Kai was silent for a long time. Then he reached out and touched her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and electric. He did not hold her hand. He just rested his fingers against her knuckles, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt more intimate than a kiss. My father signed a paper once, Kai said, his voice low, vibrating in the small space. It was supposed to give us peace. Instead, it gave them the right to build a fence across our winter grazing lands. When I cut the fence, they called me a criminal. When they shot my brother for crossing it, they called it justice. He withdrew his hand, but the warmth remained on her skin. I do not believe in your paper laws, he said, but I believe in debt. You tried to save that man in the canyon. You did not have to, but you did. That is a language I understand. Before Lila could respond, a low whistle cut through the air outside. It was a bird call, but too rhythmic, too sharp. Kai was on his feet instantly, the relaxed posture vanishing. He grabbed his rifle from the entryway. Thomas saw something, he said. Get your boots. Lila jammed her feet into her still damp boots and followed him out. The camp was already in motion. Mara was kicking dirt over the fire. Nora had the baby strapped to her back and was moving toward the deeper shadows of the cliff face. Thomas met them by the corral. Riders, Thomas said, his voice a hushed urgency. East Ridge. They are not coming down yet, but they are sweeping the canyon floor with scopes. They will find the smoke trail in 10 minutes. We cannot fight them here, Kai said. Not with Nora and the baby. He turned to Lila. If you stay, you endanger them. If you go, you draw the wolves away. I go, Lila said immediately. Kai nodded. A flicker of respect lit his dark eyes. We leave the horses. On foot, we are ghosts. On horses, we are targets. He said a few words to Mara in his own tongue. The old woman looked at Lila, her hard eyes softening just a fraction. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pouch of dried meat, shoving it into Lila's hand. Do not die, Mara said. It is bad for business. Kai grabbed Lila's arm. Move! They slipped out of the camp, heading away from the canyon wall and into a labyrinth of eroded sandstone pillars. This was the Wind Valley, a place where the wind howled through the rock formations so loudly it drowned out the sound of footsteps. For an hour, they moved at a punishing pace. Kai did not treat her like a fragile thing. He expected her to keep up, and she did, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer refusal to be a burden. He led her over sheets of slick granite where they left no prints. When they had to cross a patch of sand, he stopped, broke a branch from a mesquite bush, and swept away their tracks as they walked backward, vanishing like mist. They finally stopped in a narrow fissure between two massive boulders. The wind screamed overhead, but down here, it was relatively quiet. Lila slumped against the rock, her chest heaving. Her legs felt like lead. Kai stood at the opening of the fissure, watching the darkness. He took a canteen from his shoulder and uncorked it. He took a sip, then handed it to her. Drink, he said. Slowly, Lila took the canteen. Their fingers brushed again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact was a lifeline in the dark. She drank, the water cool and metallic, and handed it back. Kai took another sip, his lips touching the spot where hers had been. He capped it, his eyes never leaving her face. They are professional, Kai said. That man, the bounty hunter, Rourke, he does not give up. He tracks like a wolf. Where do we go? Lila asked. We cannot run forever. No, Kai agreed. We need to stop running. We need to attack. I am not a soldier. Kai, I know, he said. But you have the weapon. He pointed to the packet in her jacket. That book is the only gun that matters now. But you need a finger to pull the trigger. Lila nodded. The courier said to find the inspector. He is on the train from Santa Fe. It is supposed to stop at the Silver Creek depot tomorrow for water and fuel. Silver Creek, Kai mused. That is open ground. Dangerous. It is the only chance, Lila insisted. If we can get this to him in public, in front of witnesses, Crowley cannot touch it without exposing himself. Kai looked at her. In the dim light of the moon struggling through the clouds, his face was a study in conflict. He was a warrior who knew the cost of war. If he helped her reach that train, he was declaring open war on the most powerful men in the territory. His people would suffer. But he looked at the determination in her face, the way she held her head high despite the fear that must have been eating her alive. You realize, he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, that even if we win, you cannot go back. You will be the woman who burned the town down. I know, Lila said. She stepped closer to him. The space between them seemed to vibrate. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. I do not want to go back. I want to go forward. Kai stared at her. For a moment, the rest of the world, the bounty hunters, the ledger, the wind fell away. There was only the woman standing before him, stripped of her pretenses, raw and real. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed the bruise where the wood splinter had hit her. The touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the night. Lila's breath hitched. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a second. It was a surrender. Not to him, but to the moment, to the terrifying possibility that she was not alone. Then we go to Silver Creek, Kai said, his voice thick. We catch the train. He dropped his hand, breaking the spell, but the air around them remained charged. Get some rest, he commanded, moving back to the entrance of the fissure. I will watch. Tomorrow, we ride into the storm's eye. Lila sat down on the hard stone, wrapping her arms around her knees. She watched his silhouette against the starlit sky. She realized with a sudden, crystal clarity that she was falling, not off a horse, not into a river, but into something far more perilous. She was falling in love with the storm, and for the first time in her life, she did not want to catch herself. She wanted to see where she would land. She checked the oilskin packet one last time, ensuring it was secure. Tomorrow, she would trade silence for truth. Tomorrow, she would find out if the pen really was mightier than the Winchester, or if they would both die trying to prove it. Silver Creek was not a town. It was a scar on the earth that had been cauterized by iron and steam. Unlike Ocotillo Flats, which still clung to the dusty rhythms of the frontier, Silver Creek had sold its soul to the railroad. The air here tasted of sulfur and coal dust, a gritty film that coated the throat and stung the eyes. Lila Merritt pulled the brim of her stolen hat lower, shadowing her face beside her. Kai walked with a gait that was entirely different from his usual fluid stride. He hunched his shoulders slightly, walking with the heavy, plodding step of a weary laborer. He had traded his distinct Navajo blanket for a ragged canvas duster they had found drying on a clothesline miles back. To the casual observer, they were just two more drifters looking for work or a bottle of whiskey. But beneath the duster, Lila knew Kai's hand was resting near the knife at his belt. The eyes are colder here, Kai murmured, his voice barely audible over the screech of a locomotive shunting cars in the rail yard. It is the progress, Lila replied, though the word tasted like ash in her mouth. They call it civilization. They moved through the crowded streets, weaving between wagons loaded with timber and crates of mining machinery. Lila's goal was the main depot. She needed to know exactly when the train carrying the federal inspector would arrive. The schedule was everything. If they missed him, the ledger in her jacket would become nothing more than a death warrant. As they passed the opulent front of the Silver Creek Hotel, a structure of red brick and glass that looked entirely out of place in the desert, Lila froze. Two men were standing on the veranda, smoking cigars. One was Agent Crowley. He looked as pristine as ever, his suit unwrinkled despite the heat. Beside him stood a man Lila had only seen in newspaper sketches. Harlan Voss. Voss was a bear of a man, with a thick neck and sideburns that framed a face built for bullying. He was the railroad tycoon who was carving up the territory, and right now, he was laughing. He clapped a heavy hand on Crowley's shoulder, shaking it in a congratulatory manner. Lila pulled Kai into the shadow of a water trough. "That is him," she whispered. "Voss and Crowley. They look like friends," Kai observed, his dark eyes narrowing. "Partners," Lila corrected. She touched the packet against her ribs. The ledger made sense of the scene before them. Voss needed land for his tracks and depots. Crowley managed the land. By fabricating Indian raids, they created fear. Fear drove the settlers away and plummeted land prices. Then Voss swooped in, bought the dangerous land for pennies, and Crowley authorized the sale while pocketing the difference from the stolen supplies. It was a perfect circle of greed. "We need to move," Kai said. "If they are here, Rourke is not far behind." "I need to check the wire," Lila said. "I need to know if the inspector is actually on that train, or if it is another trap. Ben, the boy from my office. He was transferred here last week for training. He will be at the depot office." Kai looked at her, skepticism etched on his face. "Do you trust him? He is a boy. Kai, he is scared of his own shadow, but he is not malicious. He owes me." They skirted the edge of the rail yard, the ground vibrating under their feet. The telegraph office was a small wooden annex attached to the main station. Through the window, Lila saw a familiar figure. Ben was hunched over the key, his straw-colored hair messy, looking exhausted. "Wait here," Lila told Kai. "If I go in with you, it will draw attention." Kai nodded, blending into the dark recess between two freight cars. "2 minutes," he warned. "Then I come in." Lila slipped through the side door. The office smelled of ozone and stale paper. "Ben," she whispered. The boy jumped, knocking over a stack of forms. He spun around, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. "Lila!" he gasped. He looked terrible. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "My God, Lila, they said you were dead. They said you fell into the canyon. I am hard to kill," she said, moving closer. "Ben, I need help. The inspector from Santa Fe. Is he on the noon train tomorrow?" Ben stared at her. His gaze flicked to the door, then back to her face. His hands were trembling. "Lila, you should not be here. Crowley, he is everywhere." "I know," she said, "but I have the proof. Ben, I have a ledger. I can stop them. I just need to get it to the inspector." Ben swallowed hard. He looked at the telegraph key. The sounder was clicking rhythmically, a stream of data from the capital. "The train," Ben stammered. "Yes, the train comes at 12, but Lila—" He took a step back toward the desk. His hand hovered over the key. Lila felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. It was the same feeling she had when the storm broke. "Ben," she asked slowly, "what are you doing?" "I am sorry," Ben whispered. Tears welled in his eyes. "Crowley told me. He said if I saw you, he said he knows where my mother lives in Boston. He said he would burn her house down." His hand slammed down on the key. Tap, tap, dash, tap, dash, tap. It was not a message. It was a signal, an alarm. Lila stared at him. She did not scream. She did not draw her gun. She just felt a hollow, crushing weight in her chest. "Ben," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with profound sadness. "You were scared, so you sold me." "I had to," Ben sobbed. "I want to live. Lila." "So do I," she said softly. "But not like that." The door burst open. It was not Kai. It was a deputy, followed instantly by 2 men in dusters, Rourke's men. "There she is." Lila grabbed a heavy ceramic insulator from the desk and hurled it. It smashed into the oil lamp hanging above the counter. Kerosene splashed, and fire erupted, creating a wall of sudden heat and smoke. She dove through the side window, shattering the glass, and landed in the dirt of the alleyway. "Run!" she screamed. Kai was already there. He hauled her to her feet just as a bullet splintered the wood frame of the window she had just exited. "They knew!" Kai shouted, pulling her toward the maze of the industrial district. "The boy." "He signaled them," Lila choked out, running beside him. "The technology. It travels faster than we do." She realized then the bitter irony. She had spent her life believing the telegraph was a tool of connection, a silver wire binding the nation together. But in the hands of men like Crowley, it was just a long leash. They turned a corner and skidded to a halt. The alley was blocked. A wagon loaded with scrap iron had broken an axle, wedging itself between the brick walls of a blacksmith's shop and a warehouse. Behind them, boots pounded on the earth. "Dead end," Lila gasped. Kai looked up. The walls were too smooth to climb. He looked at the blacksmith's shop. The back door was barred, but near the ground, there was a black, gaping maw, the coal chute. "In," Kai ordered. He kicked the grate. It was rusted. Stubborn, he kicked it again, putting the full force of his leg into the blow. The iron shrieked and gave way. "Go!" Lila scrambled into the darkness. She slid down a slope of coal, the black dust filling her nose and mouth. Kai followed, sliding down just as shots rang out in the alley, the bullets sparking harmlessly against the brick. They landed in a pile of anthracite in the basement of the smithy. It was pitch black, hot, and smelled of iron. "Up," Kai whispered. "If we stay here, they will smoke us out." He grabbed her hand, and they fumbled through the darkness until they found a ladder. They climbed up into the main shop. The forge was cold, the smith gone for the day. Kai led her to the rear stables attached to the shop. The horses inside snorted, smelling the fear and the smoke on them. "The roof," Kai said, pointing to a hayloft ladder. They climbed, pushing open a trap door that led to the flat roof of the warehouse next door. They collapsed on the tar paper surface, hidden behind a low parapet. Below them, the streets were swarming. Men with lanterns were running back and forth. Lila could hear Crowley's voice, calm and commanding, cutting through the chaos. "Check the perimeter. She has the book. Do not shoot to kill unless you have to, but get that book." Lila lay on her back, staring at the smoke-stained sky. Her chest heaved. Her face was streaked with coal dust and blood from where the window glass had cut her arm. She felt a hand on her shoulder. "Kai." He did not speak. He simply pulled her back from the edge, into the shadow of a water tower that stood on the roof. It was a small, dark island of safety in a sea of danger. "Let me see the arm," he said. Lila hissed as he rolled up her sleeve. A shard of glass was still embedded in her forearm. The blood looked black in the moonlight. Kai took a clean rag from his pocket, one he had seemingly conjured from nowhere, and uncorked his canteen. "This will sting," he warned. He poured the water over the wound. Lila bit her lip to keep from crying out. He worked with a surgeon's precision and a lover's gentleness. He removed the glass, washed the cut, and bound it tightly with the rag. When he finished, he did not pull away. His hand lingered on her arm, his thumb tracing the line of her pulse. It was hammering, fast and erratic. Lila looked up at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, vibrating sensitivity. She was hyper-aware of everything, the rough texture of his calloused palm, the heat radiating from his chest, the way his damp hair fell over his forehead. "You should have left me," she whispered. "In the alley, you could have gotten away." "I will not leave what is mine," Kai said. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a stone dropping into a well. Lila's breath caught. "Yours." Kai looked at her, his eyes dark and intense. "The storm is mine. Is it not? I pulled it from the river." He leaned closer. The space between them evaporated. Lila could feel his breath on her cheek. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity. She wanted him. She wanted the strength of him, the quiet certainty that anchored her spinning world. She reached up, her hand tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled him down. Their foreheads touched. It was not a kiss. Not yet. It was a sharing of breath, a merging of fears. The air around them seemed to crackle, charged with a desire that was desperate and sharp. "Kai," she breathed. He pulled back, just an inch. His hand moved to her waist, his grip firm, possessive, yet restrained. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. "If I kiss you," he said, his voice rough like gravel, "there is no going back. You become the woman who lies with the enemy. The town will never take you back." "I told you," Lila said fiercely. "I do not want to go back. And my people," Kai continued, the conflict warring in his eyes. "They will see you as a danger, a weakness." He was giving her a choice. He was laying out the cost. He was terrified. She realized, not of the guns below, but of the damage he might do to her. Lila bridged the gap. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It tasted of coal dust, blood, and desperation. It was a seal on a pact. Kai groaned low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against his hard body. For a moment, they were not a fugitive and a warrior. They were just two people trying to burn away the coldness of the world with the heat of their own skins. But then, Kai broke the kiss. He pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. He held her there, creating a boundary with his own body. "Not here," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "Not like this, in the dirt, hiding like rats. You deserve better. We deserve better." Lila nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. He was right. To take this moment now, in fear, would be to let Crowley win. It would be stealing a moment instead of claiming it. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Kai agreed. He moved back, checking the load in his rifle. The intimacy instantly replaced by the warrior's focus, but the energy remained, a hum in the air between them. "We cannot run anymore," Kai said, looking over the parapet at the train tracks below. "The telegraph moves faster than the horse. The train moves faster than the man. If we run, they will be waiting for us at the next town, and the next." "So we stop running," Lila said. She stood up, wincing as her arm throbbed. "The inspector is on the noon train. We do not hide. We met him at the station," Kai asked. "It will be a fortress." "Exactly," Lila said. A cold, hard resolve settled over her. "Crowley expects us to sneak. He expects us to try to slide the book under a door or mail it. He does not expect us to walk onto the platform in the middle of the day, in front of 500 people. It is a suicide pact," Kai said, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. "It is a stage," Lila corrected. "If we give him the ledger in the dark, Crowley kills us and burns it. But if I hand it to the inspector while the town watches, while the passengers from the east watch, he cannot touch us without showing his hand." Kai nodded slowly. He looked at the woman standing in the moonlight, covered in soot, bleeding and hunted. She looked magnificent. "Then we walk into the sun," Kai said, "and we let the storm break." He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. The metal of the train tracks below gleamed like silver ribbons, leading them toward a destiny that would either free them or bury them. "Get some sleep," Kai said softly. "Tomorrow, we start a war." The sky above Silver Creek did not merely darken, it bruised. What had been a cheerful, deceptive azure only hours before had curdled into a heavy, suffocating shade of lead. The air grew thick and wet, carrying the metallic tang of ozone and the scent of rain hitting hot dust miles away. It was noon, yet the world felt like it was plunging into a premature twilight. Lila Merritt stood in the shadow of the water tower, her hand gripping the cold iron of the ladder. Below her, the station platform was a hive of activity. The 12 o'clock train from Santa Fe had just pulled in, a massive beast of iron and steam, hissing and venting white clouds that mingled with the gathering storm. "Do you see him?" Kai asked. He was crouched beside her, his rifle resting on his knees. He had cleaned the coal dust from his face, but the streaks of grime remained, making his sharp features look even more severe. "Yes," Lila whispered. "The man in the gray coat, the one with the briefcase and the 2 federal marshals flanking him. That is Inspector Thorne." Crowley was there too. He stood near the first-class carriage, shaking hands, smiling that shark-like smile. Harlan Voss was beside him, looking expansive and confident, gesturing toward the town as if he owned every brick and nail. They look untouchable, Kai noted. They are about to be touched, Lila said. She checked the oilskin packet one last time. It was tucked into her belt, hidden beneath the oversized duster she wore. Are you ready? I am ready to be a distraction, Kai said. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. Once you step out, there is no cover. You speak loud, you speak fast, and you do not stop. And you? I keep the wolves off your back, he said. Go. Lila descended the ladder. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands were steady. She moved through the alleyway, merging into the crowd of passengers and laborers on the platform. The wind picked up, whipping coats and skirts. A sudden gust tore a hat from a man's head, sending it tumbling down the tracks. The first drops of rain began to fall huge, heavy drops that slapped against the wooden planks like bullets. Lila pushed through a group of miners. She was 20 feet from Inspector Thorne. 10 feet. Agent Crowley saw her first. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, cold malice. He stepped forward, blocking her path to the inspector. Miss Merritt. Crowley's voice was loud, projected for the benefit of the crowd. Thank God we thought you had perished in the canyon. He turned to the two marshals. This is the woman I told you about. The poor girl is delirious. She stole government property in a fit of hysteria. He reached for her arm. Come now, Lila. Let us get you to a doctor. You are not well. Lila jerked her arm back. Do not touch me! Her scream cut through the noise of the station. The crowd turned. Inspector Thorne looked over Crowley's shoulder, his eyebrows raised. I am not hysterical, Lila shouted, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. She reached into her coat and pulled out the ledger. And I did not steal this. I saved it. Crowley's face went white. She is armed, he yelled, lying through his teeth. She has a gun, marshals. Detain her. The two marshals stepped forward, hands moving to their holsters. It is a book. Lila held the ledger high. The rain was falling harder now, plastering her hair to her face. It is a book of names. It is a book of lies. Silence her, Voss roared, stepping forward, his face flushing red. From the roof of the warehouse opposite the station, a shot rang out. A bullet splintered the wood of the platform inches from Lila's boot. The crowd screamed and scattered. Kai, Lila thought, panic flaring. But the shot had not come from Kai. It had come from the water tower, from behind where she and Kai had been hiding. Sniper, someone yelled. On the far end of the platform, standing atop a pile of crates, Kai Yazzie revealed himself. He did not fire into the crowd. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the air, shattering a glass lantern hanging above the station sign. Over here, Rourke, Kai shouted. His voice was deep, carrying over the wind. Come and earn your blood money. He had exposed himself. He was drawing the fire away from her. Silas Rourke, the bounty hunter Crowley had hired, emerged from the shadows of the depot building, his long coat flapping in the gale. He ignored Lila. His prize was the Navajo. Rourke raised his repeater and fired. Kai vaulted off the crates, disappearing behind a stack of lumber just as the wood disintegrated under a hail of lead. The station erupted into chaos. Passengers dove for cover. Horses reared and screamed. The storm broke fully, the sky opening up to unleash a torrent of water that turned the world instantly gray and wet. Stop him! Crowley screamed, pointing at Kai. He is the accomplice! Lila did not run. She stepped directly into Inspector Thorne's path. The rain was soaking the ledger, but the oilskin cover protected the pages. Read it, she screamed, shoving the book into the inspector's chest. Thorne, a man of stern countenance with a mustache that twitched with irritation, looked at the wild woman before him. Then he looked at the terrified crowd. He took the book. What is the meaning of this? Thorne demanded. Page 42, Lila yelled over the thunder. Read the entry for August 10th. Crowley lunged for the book. Give me that it is classified agency material. One of the marshals, sensing the shift in dynamic, stepped between Crowley and the inspector. Let the man read. Agent. Thorne opened the book, shielding it with his coat. He squinted against the rain. August 10th. Thorne read aloud, his voice booming. Purchase of 20 Winchester rifles and 4 crates of ammunition, delivered to private militia. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. This is listed under reservation food supply. Keep reading, Lila urged. The entry for last Tuesday, the raid at the canyon. Thorne flipped the pages. His face grew grim. Payment to S. Rourke. Thorne read. $50 for services rendered stage management, itemized expenses, theatrical paint, feather headdresses, and whiskey for the men. A collective gasp went through the people nearest them. The miners, the settlers, the railroad workers, they all heard it. Theatrical paint, a man in the crowd shouted. You mean the raid was fake? They dressed up as Indians. Lila turned to the crowd. They killed the courier and burned the wagons to make you afraid. To make you sell your land to Voss for nothing? Voss looked like he was about to have an apoplexy. She is lying. That book is a forgery. It is in your handwriting. Harlan. Lila stepped closer, her fear replaced by a cold, burning fury. And the seal is Crowley's. Suddenly, a massive crash echoed from the ravine side of the station. Lila turned. Kai was running along the wooden trestle bridge that spanned the Silver Creek. The creek, usually a trickle, was now a raging torrent of brown, churning water, fed by the flash flood roaring down from the mountains. Rourke was chasing him. The bounty hunter was relentless, firing as he ran. Kai! Lila screamed. She broke away from the inspector and ran toward the ravine. The bridge was slick with mud and rain. Kai was halfway across, moving with the agility of a cat, using the vertical beams for cover. Rourke was heavier, slower, but he had the superior weapon. You have nowhere to go, savage, Rourke yelled. He levered another round into his rifle. Kai stopped. He was at the center of the bridge. Below him, the water roared, carrying uprooted trees and debris. It was a grinder of death. Kai looked back at the station. He saw Lila safe. He saw the inspector holding the book. He saw the marshals closing in on Crowley. He had won, but Rourke did not know it yet. Kai turned to face the bounty hunter. He did not raise his rifle. He stood tall, the rain streaming down his face, the storm raging around him. It is over! Rourke! Kai shouted. The truth is out. I do not get paid for the truth, Rourke snarled. I get paid for scalps. Rourke raised his rifle. At that moment, a section of the muddy bank near the bridge entrance gave way. A woman in the crowd screamed. A small boy, no older than 6, had been pushed by the retreating crowd and slipped over the edge. He slid down the mud embankment, flailing, and splashed into the raging water. The current grabbed the child instantly, sweeping him toward the bridge pilings. Kai saw it happen. He looked at Rourke, who was aiming at his chest. Then he looked at the child, who was fighting a losing battle against the flood. Kai did not hesitate. He dropped his rifle. He dove off the bridge. No! Lila screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. Kai hit the water with a splash that was instantly swallowed by the roar of the flood. Rourke fired, the bullet striking the wood where Kai had stood a second before. Kai surfaced, gasping, fighting the current. He swam not for the shore, but toward the center of the channel, intercepting the drowning boy. He grabbed the child by the collar of his jacket just as they were swept under the bridge. Debris, a jagged branch of a dead oak tree, slammed into Kai's side. Lila saw him flinch, his face twisting in pain. The water turned a darker shade of red around him. Get a rope, Lila yelled at the frozen crowd. Help him. Thomas, the blacksmith from the hidden camp, appeared from the chaos. He had followed them. He threw a heavy coil of hemp rope toward the water. Kai caught the rope with one hand, his other arm locked around the terrified boy. The current battered him, slamming him against the wooden pylon of the bridge. Pull, Thomas roared. Lila grabbed the rope. Inspector Thorne grabbed it. Even Ben, the telegraph boy, rushed forward to help. Together, they heaved against the weight of the storm and the river. They hauled them in, inch by agonizing inch. Kai shielded the boy with his own body, taking the brunt of the rocks and debris. When they finally dragged them onto the mud of the bank, Kai collapsed. He was gasping for air, his shirt torn, blood oozing from a deep gash in his side where the branch had struck him, or perhaps where a bullet had grazed him. In the rain, it was hard to tell. The boy coughed, spitting up water, but he was alive. His mother pushed through the crowd, weeping, falling to her knees to embrace her son. She looked at Kai, the man she had been told was a monster, and she saw him bleeding into the mud to save her child. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder. Silas Rourke stood on the bridge, looking down. He lowered his rifle. He looked at the marshals who now had their weapons trained on him. He looked at the crowd, whose fear had turned to a simmering, dangerous anger directed entirely at him. Rourke spat into the water, dropped his rifle, and raised his hands. He knew when the wind had changed. Lila fell to her knees beside Kai. She pressed her hands against his wound. "You idiot," she sobbed, the rain mixing with the tears on her face. "You noble, stupid idiot!" Kai opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "I told you," he rasped. "I do not like innocent people paying the price." Lila looked up. Agent Crowley was being handcuffed by the marshals. He was shouting, threatening, invoking the names of senators and governors. But no one was listening. The inspector held the ledger like a Bible of judgment. Harlan Voss tried to slip away into the crowd, but a group of burly miners blocked his path. They did not touch him, but their crossed arms and hard stares formed a wall he could not pass. "It is over," Lila whispered to Kai. "We did it." The storm raged on, but the human storm, the storm of lies and violence, had finally broken. Inspector Thorne walked over to where Lila knelt. He looked down at Kai, then at Lila. He took off his hat, ignoring the rain soaking his gray hair. "Miss Merritt," Thorne said, his voice solemn, "we will need a full statement, but for now, get this man a doctor. I believe he is a hero." Lila laughed, a broken, hysterical sound of relief. "He is not a hero, Inspector. He is just a man who keeps his word." She leaned down and kissed Kai's forehead. He was cold, but his heart was beating strong and steady beneath her hand. "Stay with me," she whispered. "The storm is passing." Kai looked past her, up at the leaden sky. "Let it rain," he murmured. "It washes the world clean." Lila held him as the doctor, Dr. Miller. The town physician pushed through the crowd with his black bag. She watched as Crowley was marched away in the mud, his fine suit ruined, his head bowed not in remorse, but in defeat. She looked at the ledger, now resting on a dry crate under the station awning. It was just paper and ink, but it weighed as much as a mountain. Lila Merritt took a deep breath. The air still smelled of rain, but the suffocating dust was gone. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She looked at her own hands. They were stained with mud and blood, trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. But they were her hands again, not Crowley's tools, not the telegraph servant, hers. And as the thunder rolled away toward the east, fading into a distant rumble, Lila knew that while she had survived the flood, the woman she used to be had drowned in it, and she did not mourn her. The silence that followed the arrest of Agent Crowley was not the peaceful silence of a library or a church. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a saloon right after a bottle has been smashed against a man's head, when everyone is waiting to see who draws a pistol next. Silver Creek was a town cleaved in two. Lila Merritt sat on the wooden steps of the depot surgeon's office, watching the street through the open door. Inside, she could hear the low murmur of Dr. Miller stitching up the gash in Kai's side. Every grunt of pain from the room made her own stomach twist, but she forced herself to sit still. Outside, the mud was drying into a hard, cracked crust. The storm had washed away the dust, but it had exposed the ugly foundations of the town. People walked by in clusters, casting glances at the depot. "You should not be sitting here," a voice said. "It is not safe." Lila looked up. It was the woman whose son Kai had pulled from the flood. She held a basket covered with a gingham cloth. "My name is Sarah," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. I brought some bread and apple butter for him and for you." Lila took the basket. "Thank you, Sarah. He saved my Thomas," Sarah said, looking toward the surgeon's door. "I do not care what the others say. I do not care that he is Navajo. He is a good man." "What do the others say?" Lila asked, though she already knew. Sarah hesitated, looking down at her muddy boots. "They say you ruined the town, Miss Merritt. They say Voss will pull his money out now. They say the railroad will bypass us because of the scandal. They say—" She lowered her voice. "They say you and the Indian conspired to frame a good man like Crowley." Lila laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A good man? A man who steals blankets from children?" "I know," Sarah said quickly. "I believe you, but people are scared of being poor more than they are scared of being wrong." Sarah hurried away as a group of miners approached. They did not look at Lila with gratitude. They looked at her with the sullen hostility of men who realized their wages might be delayed. One of them spat on the ground near her boots before moving on. Lila felt a tremor in her hands. It was a strange sensation, a vibrating buzz in her fingertips. It felt exactly like the ghost of the telegraph key, tapping out a frantic message. "Run! Run! Run!" The door behind her opened. Dr. Miller stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "He is tough as boiled leather," the doctor said. "The branch missed the kidney. He lost blood, but he will live. Though I advise against swimming in flash floods for at least a month." Kai emerged behind him. He walked stiffly, his torso wrapped in white bandages that stood out starkly against his dark skin. He wore a fresh shirt that the doctor had provided, too tight across the shoulders. "We need to leave," Kai said. His voice was rough, but his eyes were clear. "You cannot ride." Dr. Miller protested. "You need rest." "If we stay here tonight," Kai said, looking at the sullen groups of men gathering near the saloon. "We will rest forever." Lila stood up. She knew he was right. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a vacuum that was rapidly filling with resentment. Voss was not in jail. Only Crowley was. Voss was likely already sending telegrams to his lawyers in Chicago, spinning a narrative of a rogue agent and a hysterical woman. "Lila." Ben stood at the corner of the depot building. The young telegraph operator looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Inspector Thorne is in the ticket office," Ben said. "He is preparing the transfer documents for Crowley." "Go to him, Ben," Lila said softly. "I did," Ben said. He held out the papers. "These are the carbon copies of every telegram Crowley sent to Voss in the last 6 months. I hid them in the back of the filing cabinet. I was too scared to burn them, and too scared to show them." Lila took the papers. She looked at Ben. She saw the shame burning in his cheeks, but she also saw a new set to his jaw. He was not looking at his shoes anymore. "You saved us today, Ben," Lila said. "When you pull on that rope—" "I sold you out yesterday," Ben replied, his voice cracking. "I have a long way to go before I break even." "We all have debts," Kai said quietly. He extended his hand. Ben stared at the hand of the warrior he had been taught to fear. Slowly, he reached out and shook it. "Get those to the inspector," Lila said, handing the papers back. "And Ben, tell him not to trust the wire. Tell him to carry the documents by hand." Ben nodded and vanished into the station. Lila turned to Kai. "The horses. Thomas brought them around back," Kai said. "We go a long way, through the wash. We do not want to pass the saloon." They rode out of Silver Creek as the sun began to dip below the western mesas, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and blood orange. The air was cool, scrubbed clean by the storm. The smell of wet sagebrush was intoxicating, a sharp, resinous perfume that cleared the coal dust from Lila's lungs. They did not speak for the first hour. They just put distance between themselves and the town. Every mile felt like a layer of heavy clothing being stripped away. Lila found herself checking behind her, her eyes scanning the horizon for dust clouds, her ears straining for the sound of pursuit. "They are not coming," Kai said. He was riding beside her, his posture relaxed despite his injury. "Not tonight. They are too busy fighting each other. Rats eat their own when the ship sinks." "Voss will not stop," Lila said. "He has too much money to lose. He will try." Kai agreed. "But the light is on him now. Cockroaches do not like the sun." They made camp in a small hollow, protected by a stand of cottonwood trees. It was not the main camp where Mara and the others were. Kai insisted they stop early. He was pale, the pain lines around his mouth deepening. Lila built a small fire while Kai tended to the horses. She watched him move. He was slower, careful, but he refused to let her do the heavy work. It was not pride, she realized. It was his way of proving to himself that he was still whole. When the fire was crackling, Kai sat down heavily on his bedroll, leaning back against a saddle. Lila sat opposite him. The flames danced between them, casting flickering shadows on their faces. "Let me check the bandage," she said. Kai nodded. She moved to his side, unbuttoning the shirt. The bandage was spotted with fresh blood, but not much. The stitches held. Her fingers lingered on his skin, warm and smooth. She felt the steady thump of his heart beneath his ribs. It was a strong, rhythmic sound, more comforting than any music she had ever heard. "You're shaking," Kai said softly. Lila pulled her hand back. "I keep hearing it. The telegraph, the clicking. It is like it is inside my head." "It is the sound of fear," Kai said. "It takes time to fade, like the echo of a gunshot in a canyon." "I dreamt of water," Lila confessed. "When I dozed off in the saddle, I dreamt the river was swallowing me, but I was not fighting it. I was letting it take me." "The river gave you back," Kai said. He caught her hand, stopping her from pulling away. "You are not drowning. Lila, you are on the bank now." Lila looked into his eyes. In the firelight, they were not the hard, guarded eyes of the warrior she had met on the ridge. They were open, vulnerable. "I gave the ledger to Thorn," Lila said. "But I kept something." She reached into her boot and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was folded into a tight square. "Page 42, she said. "The page that lists the payment to Rourke and the purchase of the theatrical paint. The page that proves the fake raids." Kai looked at the paper, then at her. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a smile of genuine respect. "Insurance," he said. "If Thorn is honest, he does not need it," Lila said. "If he is not, or if Voss buys him, then this page goes to the newspapers in San Francisco. I have the address of a reporter who hates the railroad." "You learn fast," Kai said. "You think like a coyote now." "I had a good teacher," she replied. The atmosphere shifted. The talk of enemies and strategy faded, replaced by the awareness of the two of them, alone in the vast, empty night. "What happens now?" Lila asked. The question hung in the air. "We go back to the camp," Kai said. "Mara will want to fatten you up. She thinks you are too skinny. And then," Kai looked at the fire. "My people, they are wary. They have learned that anyone who comes from the town brings sickness or soldiers. They will look at you and see the telegraph. They will see the white face." "I know," Lila said. "I felt it when we were there. Even Tomas looks at me like I am a grenade with the pin pulled." "Mara says respect is the first step of love." Kai said, "You earned respect today. You stood in the storm and you did not bend." Thomas saw that. "My people respect strength, but acceptance takes seasons." "I am not asking to be one of you," Lila said. "I know I cannot be. I am Lila Merritt. I like coffee, and I like books, and I do not know how to weave." "Good," Kai said. "Because I do not want you to be a Navajo woman. I want you to be Lila." He reached out and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed the line of her jaw. "I have spent my life fighting," Kai said, his voice low and rough. "Fighting for land, fighting for water, fighting just to be left alone. I thought freedom meant having no walls, no fences. And now, Lila whispered. Now I think freedom is choosing what you tie yourself to. Kai said, I choose to be tied to this land, and I choose to be tied to you. If you will have me. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a proposal, but not the kind she had read about in novels. There was no ring, no kneeling. It was a negotiation of souls. I have no money, Lila said. I spent my savings on the telegraph bribes. I have no job. The railroad will blackball me from here to St. Louis. I have 2 horses, Kai countered, and a very good knife, and I know where the trout hide in the river. Lila laughed, and this time the sound was wet with tears. It is a terrible deal. Terrible, Kai agreed, leaning closer. Lila closed the distance. She kissed him, and it was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the rooftop. It was slow. It was deliberate. It tasted of wood smoke and promise. It was a kiss that said, I am here. I am staying. They broke apart, breathless. Kai rested his forehead against hers. We cannot stay in the open, he said, his voice grounded in reality. Voss will send others, not Rourke, but others. We need a place that is hard to find. The old trading post, Lila suggested. Near the Painted Canyon. It has been abandoned for years. It has a well, and it is on the mail route, but far enough off the main road that no one goes there by accident. It needs a roof, Kai said, considering it. We can fix a roof, Lila said. We can make it a school, or a place for people to trade without being cheated by the agency. A place between worlds, Kai mused. Like us, Lila echoed. The next morning, they rode into the main camp. The reception was cool, guarded. Eyes watched them from the shadows of the brush shelters. Mara was waiting. She stood with her arms crossed, looking at Kai's bandaged side. You bleed too much, the old woman grumbled. You will empty yourself out before winter. I'm fine, Mara, Kai said, sliding off his horse. He winced, but hit it well. Mara turned her gaze to Lila. It was a dissecting look, sharp and unyielding. Lila sat tall in the saddle. She did not look away. She did not smile apologetically. She simply met the elder's gaze with respectful silence. Mara's eyes flicked to the saddlebag where Lila had stowed her copy of the ledger page. The old woman seemed to sense the weight of it. You brought the storm, Mara said, and you survived it. We survived it, Lila corrected. Mara nodded slowly, a barely perceptible dipping of her chin. There is stew. It is a goat. It is tough, but it is hot. It was not a hug. It was not a welcome parade, but it was an invitation. Lila dismounted. I like goats. She lied. Kai chuckled softly beside her. Later that afternoon, a rider approached the camp. It was Tomas, who had stayed behind to watch the roads. He rode in fast, dust kicking up behind his horse. Lila froze, her hand going to the Winchester in her scabbard. Kai was instantly alert. Tomas pulled his horse up. He was grinning, a rare, wide grin that showed white teeth against his dusty face. The wire, Tomas said, breathless. I heard it at the junction. The news is coming from Santa Fe. What news? Kai asked. Crowley has been indicted, Tomas said. Federal charges, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. And Voss has been summoned to Washington for a congressional hearing. Lila let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 2 days. They are not in jail yet, Lila cautioned. A hearing is just men talking in a room. It is a start, Tomas said. He looked at Lila. They say it was the book, the little book that did it. He nodded to her. It was a small gesture, but from a man like Tomas, it was a knighthood. That evening, Lila stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the desert. The sun was setting, turning the sandstone cliffs into walls of gold. The wind blew through the canyon, but it was no longer a howling beast. It was a steady, cooling breeze. She thought of the telegraph office, the dusty smell of the paper, the endless clicking of the key. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like someone else's life. She reached into her pocket and touched the folded paper. Page 42. She would keep it, not because she didn't trust the victory, but because she had learned the lesson of the West. You hope for the best. You work for the right. But you always keep a bullet in the chamber. Kai came up beside her. He did not speak. He just stood there, his shoulder brushing hers. They watched the stars come out, one by one, hard and bright points of light in the vast darkness. "Are you afraid?" Kai asked softly. "Yes," Lila admitted. "I am afraid of the winter. I am afraid of Voss. I am afraid I will burn the goat stew." Kai laughed. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into his side. "In the winter we can survive," he said. "Voss we can fight? And the stew?" "I will cook," Kai promised. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time, the future did not look like a dark tunnel she had to crawl through alone. It looked like the horizon before them, wide, dangerous, and utterly open. She was not sure if they would live happily ever after. That was for fairy tales, not for the territory. But she knew one thing for certain. She was done tripping. She was standing firm, and she was standing with him. The cottonwood leaves had turned the color of spun gold, fluttering down to cover the red earth in a quilt of yellow and rust. It was November, 3 months since the flood at Silver Creek, and the air had lost its punishing heat, replaced by a crisp, biting chill that smelled of pine needles and coming snow. Lila Merritt sat at a rough-hewn table made of split oak, the surface smoothed by her own hands and hours of sanding with river stones. She dipped her pen into the inkwell. The scratching of the nib against the paper was the only sound in the room, save for the rhythmic breathing of the wood stove in the corner. She was writing to a man she had never met, a journalist named Elias Thorne, the brother of the inspector who had taken the ledger. Elias wrote for a syndicate of papers in San Francisco and Chicago, the kind of papers that usually printed stories about bloodthirsty savages and heroic cavalrymen. To Mr. "Thorne," she wrote, her handwriting loopier and freer than the cramped script she had used for telegraph logs. "You asked for the story of the Navajo agitator and the rogue mailwoman. You asked for a dime novel hero and a damsel in distress. I cannot give you those, because they do not exist. What I can give you is the truth about a man named Kai Yazi and the corrupt machinery that tried to grind him and this territory into dust. Do not print legends, Mr. Thorne. Legends are easy to swallow, but they offer no nourishment. Print the facts. The West is not won by gunpowder alone, but by the quiet courage of those who refuse to look away." Lila set the pen down. She looked out the window. The structure they had built was modest, nestled in a grove of willows near the river bend, 5 miles downstream from where she had fallen. It was not a fortress, nor was it a traditional hogan. It was a hybrid, much like the life she and Kai were carving out. The walls were adobe and stone, thick enough to keep out the winter wind, but the roof was timber, pitched to shed the snow. A hand-painted sign hung above the Porch River Bend station. Water, news, fair trade. It was a stopping point, a place where the stagecoaches could water their teams without paying the extortionate rates of the agency, a place where a Navajo shepherd could trade wool for coffee without being cheated on the scales. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Lila did not reach for the Winchester hanging above the mantel. That reflex was fading, slowly, like a bruise healing under the skin. She walked out onto the porch, wrapping her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. Ben was dismounting from a speckled mare. The boy had filled out in the last few months. The nervous twitch was gone from his eye, replaced by a steadiness that suited him. He wore the badge of a senior operator now, a promotion earned not by nepotism, but by the vacuum left when Crowley's network was dismantled. "Afternoon, Lila," Ben called out, tethering his horse. He patted his saddlebag. "I have the mail from the eastbound train, and the Albuquerque papers." "Good news or bad?" Lila asked, leaning against the railing. "Mixed," Ben admitted, climbing the steps. "Harlan Voss is out on bail. His lawyers are expensive, and they are delaying the hearings in Washington." Lila sighed, watching her breath mist in the cold air. Money buys time. Ben, we knew that. But, Ben continued, a grin spreading across his face, Crowley was sentenced yesterday. 15 years in federal prison at Leavenworth. Hard labor. Lila felt a knot loosen in her chest. 15 years, she repeated. That is enough time to think. And there is a new edict from the Department of the Interior, Ben added. All supply wagons entering the reservation territory must be weighed and inspected by a third party. They are calling it the Merit Protocol in the newsrooms, though the politicians call it the Oversight Act. I prefer oversight, Lila said. I do not want my name on a law. Laws can be broken. It is a start, Ben said. He looked around the yard. Is he here? He is down by the river, Lila said. Checking the fish traps with Thomas? Ben nodded. He hesitated for a moment, scuffing his boot against the wood. You know, Lila, the offer is still open. The telegraph company in Denver needs a supervisor. Good pay, electric lights, no dust. Lila looked at the boy who had once betrayed her out of fear, and who now rode 20 miles out of his way to bring her the news. Thank you, Ben, she said gently. But I am not looking for electric lights. I like the stars out here. They are honest. Ben smiled, a little sadly, but with understanding. I figured, but I had to ask. Mrs. Harlow sends her love. By the way, she says she is baking a fruitcake for Christmas, and she expects you to come eat it, or she will ride out here and force-feed you. Tell her we will be there, Lila laughed. Ben tipped his hat and went inside to leave the mail and warm himself by the stove. Lila stayed on the porch, her eyes drawn to the line of trees that marked the river. She saw two figures walking up the path. One was broad and heavy Tomas. The other was lean, moving with that fluid, predatory grace that still made her heart skip a beat. Kai carried a string of trout in one hand and his rifle in the other. He wore a heavy coat lined with sheepskin, but his head was bare, his black hair tied back with a leather thong. He stopped when he saw her, even from 50 yards away. She could feel the connection, a tether that pulled taut between them. He said something to Tomas, handed him the fish, and walked toward the porch. His side had healed, leaving a jagged white scar that looked like a lightning bolt against his skin. He moved without a limp now, though he was careful when he lifted heavy things. Ben is here, Lila said as he reached the steps. I saw the horse, Kai said. He climbed the steps and stood beside her. He did not touch her immediately. He simply occupied the space next to her, his presence a wall against the cold. Bad news. Crowley got 15 years, she said. Kai nodded slowly. Justice is a slow horse, but it arrives. Voss is still free, she added. Voss is a man who fights with gold. Kai said, Gold runs out. Memory does not. The people know who he is now. He can never hide in the shadows again. He turned to look at her. His dark eyes searched her face, looking for the lingering shadows of the trauma they had shared. And you, are you still writing your letter? I finished it, Lila said. I told the truth, that you are not a spirit, and I am not a hero. We are just people who got tired of being pushed. A dangerous thing to print, Kai murmured, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. If people realize they can push back, the world might change. Later that evening, the station was quiet. Ben had ridden back to town. Thomas and Nora had taken their wagon back to the main encampment a mile away, where the community was slowly rebuilding. Stronger this time, with better defenses and a wary eye on the horizon. Lila and Kai sat by the fire in the main room. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside it was warm. The smell of cedar smoke and roasted trout filled the air. Do you miss it? Kai asked suddenly. Lila looked up from her book. Miss what? The wire, Kai said. The voice of the world. The noise. Lila closed the book. It was a novel by Dickens, one of the few possessions she had reclaimed from her old room. I used to think the wire was freedom, she said. I thought if I could just hear what was happening in New York or London, I was part of something big, but it was just noise. Kai, it was other people's lives, tapping out in code. She stood up and walked to the window. peering out into the darkness. "Here," she said. "When the wind blows, I know it is going to snow. When the coyotes yip, I know the moon is rising. It is real. I do not miss the noise. I have found the signal." Kai stood and moved behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "My people are asking about you," Kai said softly into her ear. "Oh." Lila tensed slightly. "What are they saying, that the white woman burns the fry bread?" Kai chuckled, the sound vibrating in his chest. "Mara says your fry bread is acceptable. No, they ask if you are going to stay. They see the station. They see the work you do. But they know the white world pulls hard." "I am not going anywhere," Lila said firmly. "I told you, I have no job. I have no money." "You have a very good horse," Kai reminded her, "and a share in a very profitable trading post." "And a partner," Lila added, turning in his arms to face him. "Unless he is tired of me." Kai looked down at her. His expression was serious, devoid of the teasing light that sometimes danced there. "You are the bridge, Lila," he said. "Before you. I looked at the town and saw only enemies. Now, I look and I see possibility. I see Sarah bringing bread. I see Ben bringing news. You made that happen. You are the bridge between the river and the road." "A bridge gets walked on," Lila whispered. "And a bridge connects," Kai countered. "We are both bridges. I stand between the old ways and the new storm. You stand between the silence and the truth. It is not an easy place to stand." "No," Lila agreed. "It is not." "But the view," Kai whispered, leaning his forehead against hers, "is worth it." The next morning it was clear and cold. The sky was that piercing, impossible blue, the same blue that misses. Harlow had once called a liar, but today it felt honest. They walked down to the river. The water was low, sluggish with ice forming at the edges. It was hard to imagine the raging monster it had been 3 months ago, or the freezing trap it had been the day they met. They reached the spot where the canyon wall curved, creating the secluded alcove where Lila had fallen. The rocks were dry now. The moss was brown and dormant. Lila stood at the edge of the water, looking at her reflection. She saw a woman with sun-weathered skin, wearing a skirt of durable wool and a coat that had been patched twice. She looked older than her years, but her eyes were clear. There was no fear in them. Kai stood beside her. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface of the water. 1, 2, 3 skips before it sank. "This is where I died," Lila said softly. "The old Lila." "The one who kept her head down. And this is where you were born," Kai said, wet, shivering, and angry. "I was terrifying," Lila laughed. "You were," Kai agreed. "You looked like a drowned rat who wanted to fight a bear." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. His palms were rough, calloused maps of his labor. "I never thanked you," Lila said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "For pulling me out, for hiding me. You could have walked away. You could have let the river take me." "No," Kai said. "I could not." "Why?" Lila asked. "I was a stranger. I was in trouble." Kai looked at the river, then back at her. The wind lifted the hair from his face. "Because I was waiting," he said simply. "Waiting for what?" "For the rain," he said. "The desert is hard. Lila, it is beautiful, but it is hard. It dries a man out. It makes him hard like the stone. I was becoming stone. I had forgotten how to feel anything but anger and duty." He squeezed her hands. "Then you fell from the sky," he said. "And you were chaos. You were loud. You were dangerous. But you were alive. You made me remember that I was alive." Lila felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of a profound, aching gratitude. "I love you, Kai," she said. It was the first time she had said the words aloud in the daylight, without the cover of darkness or danger. "I love this hard land, and I love the man who taught me how to walk on it." Kai smiled. It was the slow, unfolding smile that she had seen that first day, the one that had terrified and intrigued her. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles, then the palm. "I do not have much to give you. Lila Merritt," he said. "No gold, no big house in the east. Just this station, this river, and a fight that will probably never end." "I do not want a house," Lila said. "I want a home." Kai pulled her close. The cold wind whipped around them, tangling their hair, pressing their clothes against their bodies. It was the same wind that had howled on the night of the raid, the same wind that had screamed through the telegraph wires. But now, it was just the wind. Kai leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You are the only storm I'd ever welcome," he whispered, repeating the words he had spoken when she was shivering on the rock. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes warm and crinkling at the corners. "But I am glad the storm has passed," he added softly. "And I am glad the rain decided to stay." Lila laughed, pulling him down for a kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of winter air and promise. It was not a desperate clinging to life, but a celebration of it. They stood there for a long time, two figures silhouetted against the red rock and the blue sky. Around them, the west stretched out vast, indifferent, and beautiful. It was a land that could kill you with a whisper or save you with a drop of rain. But they were no longer just surviving it. They were part of it. Lila looked up at the hawk circling high above. She thought of the letter she had written. She thought of the ledger, now locked away in an evidence locker in Washington. She thought of the small schoolroom she planned to open in the back of the trading post come spring. The world was still wild. There were still wolves in the canyons and wolves in the cities. But she was no longer afraid of the dark. She took Kai's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Come on," she said. "We have work to do. The midday stage will be here soon, and the coffee is cold." Kai squeezed her hand. "Let us go." They turned away from the river and walked back up the path toward the station. Smoke curled from the chimney, a beacon of gray against the blue. They walked in step, leaving footprints in the red earth that would be washed away by the next rain, only to be made again the next day. It was not a perfect life. It was a hard life, but it was theirs. And for Lila Merritt and Kai Yazzie, that was more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to She Tripped Into His River Bath. Navajo warrior smiled and said, "You're the only storm I'd ever welcome." I truly hope you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West as much as I enjoyed bringing it to life for you. It's been a ride of danger, romance, and the search for truth in a dusty world. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me, where in the world are you listening to this story from? It is always amazing to see how far these tales travel. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more rugged romances and frontier adventures, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to like this video and smash that hype button. Your support helps these stories reach more people and keeps the campfire burning. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next trail.